For the next couple of weeks, we're going to spend a little bit of time in talking about courage, particularly courage related to being a parent, and trying to get a little better understanding of what that's going to be like and what it means and how it tied into the Bible. In fact, this morning I'm actually going to borrow, and I have to give credit, a gentleman named Michael Catt, C-A-T-T, has basically written the message from the series out of the movie in Courageous. And there's a series of ideas and topics, and I like to give credit when someone else is doing some of the work and I get to interpret it. But this morning, one of the first things that we're going to talk about is peer pressure. And, you know, over the last few weeks, we've been talking about that fresh start, and we even had a week that we talked about what peer pressure was like as far as going to school and what it's like as far as being a Christian. But this morning we're going to talk about a little different slant of that. And normally we hear peer pressure as a negative. If someone says it, it's a bad thing. But yet, particularly I know as a coach and as an athlete, we sometimes got our student athletes to put pressure on other kids to do the right thing, to work harder at practice, you know, to be smarter in the plays, to make sure their uniform was right, to do those kind of things, to show leadership. So that was a peer pressure that's good. You know, it's sort of like when we say prejudice, and prejudice is just such a terrible word, but yet in reality we often ask ourselves and our kids to be very prejudiced about their choice of friends. Not because of the color of their skin or because of the church that they go to, but because of their behavior. And we would then tend to say that that prejudice was a good prejudice if they chose to say no to certain behaviors. Well, this morning, let's think about the prejudice, the peer pressure of an athlete. And I don't know how many know, but there's a fellow who's now playing pro ball. His name is Tim Tebow. And Tim was a fellowship Christian athlete, played for Florida, always wore scripture on his black eye makeup, and he was all over the place. And the story is that a news reporter asked him, Tim, don't you find it difficult handling the peer pressure about being a Christian? About being this example and people always pointing at you and doing that? And Tim's response is the response that I wanted for the peer pressure that we're going to talk about. Tim's response was, what do you mean? And she goes, well, you know, you're carrying your Bible in the locker room, and you're always marking scripture in your face, and you're openly praying, you know, and people are looking at everything that you do wrong, and they're making fun of you. And he goes, no, no, no. He said, you don't understand. He says, I am the peer pressure. I am applying the pressure for others to see it my way. Wow. What an unusual way to look at things. Because I'm guessing that most of us spend our time wondering how, as Christians, we don't offend the rest of the world. How can we take our faith, turn it more inside, make it a little more quiet, make it a little less obvious, put it in a position that we don't offend others? And yet 83% or 90-some% of the United States claims that they at least believe in God. And yet we find ourselves without the courage to be the peer pressure. To say, this is how you should live your life. Almost sounds scriptural, huh? Isn't that what Jesus said? This is how you should live your life. This is what you should do. Well, let's take a look at the story we talked to the kids about Moses' parents. Until Exodus 6, they actually remained unnamed. And yet, they're a significant part of this whole tribe of Levi, which is the tribe of the 12 tribes. It is the tribe that is most responsible for all the worship and all of those things that are related to Judaism at its core. So at the beginning of the story of Moses, his parents were so courageous that this birth of their third child, all right, and they've been enslaved, they're in bondage, and they said that sometimes God chooses foolish the conditions to create good things. says a lot of women in the past, you think, in our society have been talked into abortions because conditions weren't favorable. But Moses' parents made a different choice. They made a choice to not only give birth, but then to give him up. But not really for true adoption because they couldn't manage him. They gave him up because they said God needed someone inside of Pharaoh's house. In Hebrews this morning we read, said by faith, said Moses when he was born was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they thought he was a beautiful child. The implication in that beautiful meaning he had a purpose and plan in life. God had a special plan. And they were not afraid of the king's edict. They weren't supposed to have any more kids. The king didn't want any more of those Jewish kids around. So, sent him off. So Moses learned something from his parents, from the story of his birth. Because they weren't afraid of the king. That they would raise a child and actually end up getting him inside of Pharaoh's house. They already learned how to live and how to act through the circumstances of life. They were people of faith. They were people of faith who were drawn to do God's will. They knew what we sometimes forget. Satan will do what he has to do to destroy our children. As he destroys our kids, he gradually breaks down our society. He may not be able to get to us, because we've lived all the life experience and we're dug in and we're going to hold our ground, and maybe we are courageous enough to stand up for our faith. But he's going to tell our kids that they should be ashamed of their faith. He's going to tell our kids that, well, you know, if that upset that group over there, then it's really mean of you to upset them. Forgetting the fact that if your faith is the most important thing to you and someone prevents you from sharing it, aren't they upsetting you in turn? Isn't it amazing how we accept the weaker side? We're always coming in. So Vance Havner wrote, he says, we forget that too many church member parents would rather have their children to succeed and be popular in Egypt than bound for the promised land. He says he knows Christian parents who've lowered their standard, compromised their convictions to please their children. And thus, while the children are growing up, the parents are growing down. And this generation lacks the backbone, grit, and courage to take the unpopular stand against Pharaoh. Do we have the courage to understand what our role is? What our responsibility is? Some of us a lot of us have already raised our kids. And you know, we did the right thing. We did it right, and they're still not following the Lord. And that's not fine, but it is fine. We've done our job. In the movie trailer today, the lead character, he looks at his son and says, I know I didn't start well, but I want to finish strong. So there's never a time that we can't start over. But the longer it goes, the harder it gets. Because now we've got to sell somebody on a different way. You know, it's sort of like being a teacher, and you teach things a certain way, and then all of a sudden, there's new research out. And it comes out that we've been teaching it wrong. Or maybe you're going to your doctor, and your doctor's been giving you a medicine, and all of a sudden you go in the next day, and she says, hey, you know what? I've been giving you this drug, but we've now found out that I've been giving you the wrong thing, and I've got to change. I don't know about you, but my first reaction is, oh, more new research. You know what? I'm feeling fine. Leave it alone. Isn't it harder to sell you on something new once I've got you on something old? Isn't it harder to bring you back to your faith once I've told you that you should feel sorry and ashamed of your faith because it upsets others? As a parent, do you have the understanding, do you have the courage to know your role and your responsibility? The author of the story here says he was working with a group of people who were powerful, influential leaders. And he gave them Ken Jenkins picked a picture of an eagle that says, eagles know they are eagles. Eagles never sit around wondering what all other eagles think or how the hawks feel about them. So they don't worry about stirring the nest a little bit. They understand who they are. You don't see eagles on Dr. Phil or on Oprah and talking about all their problems and all their concerns. Eagles know they're eagles. They teach their eaglets to fly. They are confident. It's built into their DNA. He then says, chickens, on the other hand, I've met chicken parents who just teach their kids to walk around and scratch in the dirt. Chickens don't ever say anything. They certainly never say, you can be somebody. Or they simply go, well, I guess you're going to be a Chick-fil-A biscuit in the morning. And finally, he says, how about the ostrich? He said the ostrich just hides his head in the stand and never sees a predator coming. Oh, we have parents who like ostriches, he said, and they don't know. And they won't have anything to do with anything. You've got to be smarter than that. What's on their computer? I don't know. I'm scared to look. Said, who are they hanging out with? I don't know. I really don't want to know. Said, where are they? I'm not sure, but I'd probably rather not know that either. It's your roof, it's your food, it's your car. He says, wake up. Said, get out of the sand. It's your responsibility. But here's the deal. He says, an eagle disturbs. He said, an eagle goes in and ruffles the nest. When it's time to change things, it's time. When it's time to feed, it's time. The eagle does that. He says then, too, he says the eagle demonstrates. The eagle shows the little ones how to go get food. The eagle flies around the nest. And it's the job of the eaglets to be paying attention so when the eagle goes in and kicks them out of the nest, that they're going to fly. He says the eagle develops. The eagle will shove that eaglet right out of the nest. About a mile up from the ground, just when the eaglet thinks it's hopeless, the mom swoops in to catch it. The eagle will never learn to fly by watching videos about flying. You've got to get out of your comfort zone. The author says he loves Moses' parents. He says, I want to meet him in heaven, and I want to know how you stand against Pharaoh. He said, how'd you do it? Isn't that question? I mean, how do people do it? We look around in our own lives, and there's somebody in our life that we look at and go, how do they stand up to that? How do they face all that disaster in their life? You know, they've buried their children, they've lost their spouse, and they just keep on going. How do they do that? I know so-and-so was so addicted to everything, and you know, he goes through, I said a couple of weeks ago, we have a little baby at Dorsey who's now 4 weeks old, 5 weeks old, and it's on methadone. And a woman in her 40s with all of her kids grown has gone in and adopted the child. I wonder, how do people do that? I got a 14-year-old I've been responsible for the last 3.5 weeks. And he's not even living at my house, and I wonder. 9 o'clock, you got to go and sign a permission slip to go on a field trip because he forgot. Because I'm the guardian. My nephew and niece are taking care of him. I got it made. But at times, man, adopt? You got to be kidding me. At my age? Moses' parents, though, they knew that God had a plan. In Hebrews verses 24 and 25, it says, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be a child and son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now see, he could have bought into this. He was fully adopted into the family, and he could have gone on, and he could have been the coolest dude in town. Pharaoh was his dad, man. He had it made. But he said, nope. He knew who he was. He knew he was an eagle. He knew he was a Jew, and he knew what God had called him to do. And he said, and it went through, he said, rather to endure the ill treatment of the people of God than to enjoy passing the pleasures of sin, he chose the ill treatment. Considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasure of Egypt, for he is looking to that reward. Moses saw the peer pressure right there. I know who I am. Do you know who you are? Do you know who you are? Even if you're not a parent, do you know who you are? You're a child of God. You're saved by the grace of Christ. So what's the guarantee? It's scary to do that. If I step up and I make this change and I do things different, people are going to think I am nuts. The movie. It's not good enough to be good enough. I don't want to be a parent who's just good enough. I don't want to be a Christian who's just good enough. I don't want to be the hands of Christ that are too tired to do the extra work, but do a little work. If I make the wrong choices, I may miss out on some chances. Character and integrity still matter, folks. Moses refused to live a life in the palace. He chose, he decided. And so we have a quote by Mark Miller. He says, the quality of character doesn't make a leader, but the absence of it flaws the entire process. I can't believe that some coach along the way had not already said that to me. So Nehemiah wrote in 5:15, he says, I didn't because of the fear of the Lord. Now understand, fear is translated truly as worship of the Lord. It's not that you're scared of Jesus. It's, Nehemiah said, I didn't because I really worship God. I didn't because I respect and love my spouse. I didn't because I respect and love my parents. I didn't because I respect and love myself. That's what Nehemiah's saying. So how are you rewarded? It said Hebrews 11:28 this morning said, God brought them out. He brought them out of slavery. Oh, it took a long time, but God brought them out. Hebrews 11:29, the next verse, God took them through. So not only after He got you out of wherever it is that you wanted to be, He took you through it. And then He brought them in to Him. Moses refused to compromise, and his faith was rewarded. When we choose to compromise, we move from spirituality to nominal Christian. We're no different than anybody else. Everybody goes, oh, they seem just like everybody else. And there's part of you that should be that way. I like to pride myself in going somewhere and somebody saying, well, you don't look or act like a pastor. Well, the look part I wonder about, because hopefully I'm not sure what that means. But the act part, I hope that means that I'm not pious, that I'm not looking down on them, I'm not condemning them. I'm hoping it doesn't mean that I act like everybody else and seem normal. It was interesting. My last 200 safety classes, there have been pastors in both of them. And all of us have said the same, that people look at you and go, you're a pastor and you own a gun? Yeah. I'm not planning on using it on you, but, yeah. And we have a lot of fun with them when we do that. It's amazing how we become stereotyped that, but the world sees you the very same. So your reputation in the community determines if you really have got character. If your lifestyle in this church, if your lifestyle in your family is not a reflection of God bringing you out, taking you through, and bringing you in, then you need to look at that. We tend to agree with what's on talk radio, and if things are, people aren't aggressively sharing their faith and doing this kind of thing, but yet we start learning how we hate people and this and that, and we want things to be our way. Moses chose the imperishable. He saw the invisible. He did the impossible. Said Martin Luther wrote, there's only 2 days that actually matter. This day and that day. Said if you're surrendered to the Lordship of Christ, he said you already know what you need to do. All other options are off the table. It doesn't matter what everybody else says. All other options are off the table. Christianity is not a cafeteria line where you get to get a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We talked this in the last week. We said you're either in or you're out. He's either Lord of all or He's not Lord at all. what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes on this day, or in the next 5 days in your life, that you're going to look to God and say, give me the courage. What is it you want me to do on this day? That's what you're being called to do. Hopefully you won't have to put your child in a basket and have it raised by the enemy king. But it may be just as difficult. It may be looking at your finances. It may be looking at your lifestyle. It may be looking at your family and saying, you know, I didn't start out strong, but I want to finish strong.